In today's podcast, we talk about depression and suicide. So we want to alert you about that. And if you or someone you know is struggling in Canada, you can text or call 988. You know, I was really taken aback when I was preparing for today's podcast. We're talking about men, depression, and suicide. So important that we talk about this. And I was a health reporter for a number of years, so I thought I knew a few things about this issue, that it's the second leading cause of death for men under the age of 50, that men die by suicide at 3 times the rate that women do. And that's in North America and also the UK. But one of the most disturbing and saddest facts that I came across is the reason why my guest, Dr. John Ogrodniczuk, created an organization called HeadsUpGuys. It's a resource that's designed for men and their families to help them cope and to help prevent a downward slide that many men face. Dr. Ogrodniczuk is also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and director of the psychotherapy program at the University of British Columbia. If you have a male in your life, whether a family member, a friend, a colleague, I really hope you listen to this interview. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mary. Thanks very much for having me.
So I think we should start up and talk about why you started Heads Up Guys.
Well, if we reflect back on some of the alarming statistics that you just shared a moment ago, that's really at the crux of our efforts to develop the Heads Up Guys resource. It was abundantly clear that what we were doing wasn't working. The services, resources that were available weren't connecting with men. Men weren't using it. Many were suffering in silence, and far too many felt that their pain was so entrenched, deep, insufferable, that they looked to death as their only escape. So we really needed to do something different. We weren't quite sure what different really looked like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you know what I found shocking was the story that you relayed about what was going on with men at doctors' offices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was working with a psychiatry resident who was doing her research project on the topic of men's depression. And so for this project, she went to a large family practice clinic on the campus of UBC, and she sat herself in the waiting room, and we had a study protocol, lots of questions for guys to fill out while they were waiting to see their family doctor. And one of the items in the questionnaire protocol was, are you currently experiencing thoughts of suicide? Yes or no? I think there was about somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10% of the participants, while they were sitting in the doctor's office, saying, yes, I'm currently experiencing thoughts of suicide right now, right here. Not one of those men, when they saw their family physician, mere moments after completing that item, brought up the topic of suicidal ideation, having thoughts of suicide, wanting to take their own life. And that was shocking. So that was also telling us we need to do something different to change the conversation around the topic of suicide.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that, I was shocked by that because they're there right at the doctor's office. And I mean, I often hear that, you know, people may not feel comfortable talking about this with their loved ones, but you would think that then they would talk about it to their doctor.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And so, I mean, there's so many questions around this. Like, first of all, why do you think that is? Why would they not even want to talk to their doctor about this?
Well, I think you have to invoke this construct of masculine socialization to kind of get a broader sense of what some of the strong factors influencing men's behavior around mental health in general, and specifically around suicidality. If you think about how society teaches boys to be men, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. So what are the things that you're supposed to do? Be strong, a sturdy oak, stoic, figure stuff out yourself, put your head down, push through whatever pain or obstacle that's in your way. And what you don't do is reach out for help, expose any weaknesses or vulnerability, don't share your feelings with others, and don't ask for help. So here, guy,
can I ask you though?
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously we can't speak for every culture, but if you were to think about Western culture, hasn't that narrative like somewhat changed in certain areas? Where men are encouraged more to be sensitive, to show their feelings. That it's okay to cry. I mean, have we not made a bit of progress in that area in some areas of life?
Yeah, indeed, I would say we have, but we have a long way to go still. Over and over again, I'm exposed to different men from different cultures that are all, in a way, burdened with expectations of how they ought to be. So it's not that men don't want help, that they don't want to ask for it.
Hmm.
Sometimes they don't know how, they don't know where to look for that help. And for many, they're actually afraid of kind of violating masculine norms, being seen by others around them as not being a good, strong man. And unfortunately, for many guys out there, this ideal of what a strong, tough man is means that they don't ask for help. They figure things out, that they don't expose their humanity to others, really. Every human being suffers pain. No one out there is immune to that. And I think what we do need to change the narrative around, like you were saying, is that men are men are humans. We'll suffer. We'll feel pain. We want others to be there for us, just like we often want to be there for others who themselves may be experiencing that pain. And so by saying, I'm having a really tough time, I'm scared, I'm down, I'm grieving, whatever it may be, that's okay. It doesn't affect how I see myself as a strong person, a strong man.
The other thing I wondered about too, is, I mean, there are symptoms of depression, and that could include, men taking, I guess, less interest in activities that they normally like. There's changes in sleep. They could be fatigued. There are all these symptoms, but so I'm thinking about like where on that path of depression, do people not notice, or are these men hiding it? Are they hiding those symptoms, even though they might be experiencing it?
Sometimes they are. There's this insidious creep of these symptoms. They're not there and then they're profoundly there. It's that sometimes their sleep is off a little bit, but then that becomes our norm. But because it's occurred over a longer period of time, it's just kind of
Mm.
been accepted. I'm not sleeping anymore, or my appetite, I just don't want to eat anymore. And it's not like it's just begins like this. But then very often guys do know that they're struggling in some way. They do know that they feel off, but it comes back to the what we were saying a few minutes ago, is say there's concern about whether or not they can share that with other people, how other people will react to that, whether they'll be judged, rejected, abandoned. And so guys, not too infrequently, will turn to other ways to cope with that pain, if you will. And that's where substance use really comes into play. And that's very common for guys to kind of numb the pain, to escape from it, to distance themselves from those feelings. And in a temporary way, it kind of works. But in a long term way, it does not work
Hmm.
whatsoever. It compounds the problems, makes things far, far worse. And sometimes it makes the pain feel intractable because it's never addressed properly.
Yeah. And I can imagine, I mean, if it's hidden, if the depression is hidden and, his family or loved ones don't know about it, but they see now that there's an addiction, that they're reliant on drugs or alcohol or whatever, then is there necessarily sympathy? Maybe not.
Unfortunately, that's part of the stigma that surrounds substance misuse, really, is that everyone makes some sort of conscious decision to misuse or abuse substances. But that's not the case at all. No one who ever ends up in that place says, you know what, I'd like to be a boozer or a druggie, as an example. Under every single case, there's pain, very often emotional, psychological pain, but sometimes also physical pain. Like, as an example, the folks who work in the construction industry, they suffer very, very high uses of different types of substances. It's not because they want to, because it's often they're experiencing incredible physical pain. And a lot of the people who work in that industry, if they don't show up to work, they don't get paid and they're at risk of losing their job.
Yeah.
So they numb that pain so they can go and continue working. So that's just an example of how it can be done, or how it can occur that people end up using substances more and more. It's not a conscious decision to abuse.
Yeah, but you talk a lot about pain that these men feel. I mean, this isn't necessarily a physical pain. This is a different kind of pain. Can you talk about that? Because there was also, again, a surprising fact that you disclosed about pain and men who attempt suicide, but they manage to live, and what they say about that.
Well, through our work, we've rarely, if ever, encountered somebody who has made a suicide attempt and lived, said, yeah, I really wanted to die. These guys don't want to die. They just want their pain to end, but they don't know how to end that pain. And if you are somebody who has experienced depression, even at a moderately severe level, you know just the depth of that pain. It affects every aspect of your being, not only how you feel about yourself, but how you presume people feel about you. And one of those concerns that a person has when they're really suffering a lot is that they're a burden to others. And so sometimes those acts of taking one's life is not only to end the pain that they're feeling, it's also to relieve others of the burden that they believe they are on those other people's lives. And that's a very scary place to be.
Yeah. Okay. I find that fact fascinating. Now, would that be true of just men, or generally speaking of anyone who suffers from depression?
That's really anyone who suffers from depression. This is not a male-specific phenomenon that we're talking about, but it's very often the fact that men who are feeling that way, compounded by the fact that a lot of these guys don't know where or how to look for that help, they perhaps feel they don't have the permission to seek that help, even if they know where it is. They're left isolated in that pain, alone. And that's a frightening place to be.
When men have a suicide attempt, but they manage to live, what are the chances that they're going to do it again?
Depends whether they get help. If they make an attempt, they survive, but they don't get the help that they need and deserve, the chances are actually pretty high that they'll try again. But if they can get help and gain a sense of hope, have people around them that really care and that they believe that the people around them do care, that they're not a burden, that people are making a conscious, independent decision to say, hey, you are an important person in my life and I want to be there for you. If the guy can believe that, then they'll want to live for them rather than wanting to escape life because they feel that their life is somehow an impediment on others.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about shame as well, that is associated with pain. And so why is it shame that can be the focus of these men and not another kind of emotion? Like, why not remorse or sadness, or, why shame?
Well, sadness is a core aspect of a depressive experience, but the shame comes in because somehow a lot of guys feel that they've failed. They failed being a good, strong man. They failed others in their lives. That they haven't been able to fulfill sort of their manly or masculine obligations in life, to be a caretaker or a provider, the sturdy oak for others to rely on. And so there's this sense of that they failed. As I say, I think that's the simplest way, that they've failed.
You know, when you keep talking about this idea of masculinity that men have, I mean, it does, okay, it's certainly ingrained, but it just seems so like as if we're stuck in a groove. You know, even though, like, even despite, as I was saying, how we've tried to change the narrative and that it's okay, you know, for men to show vulnerability and sensitivity and all that. You know, I think on the one hand, women, we've been able to make strides, right? In the workplace and, you know, socially and at home. I mean, still, of course, there's always room for improvement, but well, what about men? Like, as far as this emotional side and the, you know, psychological side, what's going on there?
Well, I think you have to approach this with a lens that it requires generational shifts. If I think of my own father and how he grew up, how I grew up, how my own son's growing up, I see these shifts, but they take time. I see my son, how he engages with his male friends, and I'm thinking, wow, I would never have those conversations with my friends when I was growing up. And in fact, in some ways, I still don't have those conversations with men that aren't really close to me because we're all kind of exposed to those same social forces. You know, the old norms don't show any weakness or vulnerability. That means never disclose to others that you may be afraid or sad or lonely. And more contemporary communications, like guys need to express their feelings more. And it's like, okay, well, I'm told to do one thing here, but I'm told that the opposite is what it means to be a man. So it's like, what do I do? Who do I trust?
Well,
how do I be?
Yeah. Doesn't that even make it more confusing? Like in some ways I can see the good side of it, right? Because it's saying, okay, it's okay if you show these, you know, what used to be thought of as weaknesses. You know, you can be vulnerable. You can cry. On the other hand, if they're getting conflicting messages, that's even more confusing.
It is.
Yeah.
It's tough to be a guy, you know, and I'm not flippant when I say that. It really is because of these conflicting messages. And I think what's really important is that for each individual, we need to think of ourselves as an individual, a person, feeling good about who we are as a person. Doesn't matter about your sex or gender. It just matters about your sense of self. I can feel strong and capable and competent, but also understand that there are times where I will feel pain, I will feel suffering, that perhaps I want to be taken care of, need to be taken care of. But that doesn't mean that I'm no longer that strong, capable, competent person. And it's like I have to give myself the flexibility to experience humanity in all aspects. I'm not a rigid person where I fit inside this box and I'm either good or bad. I'm strong or weak. That's not how life ought to be. That's not how we ought to think of ourselves.
So for a man who is suffering serious depression and having suicidal thoughts, I mean, where do you begin? Like, and what does work as far as treatments? And
Well, I think it begins by recognizing that you are struggling, that what you're feeling, I don't like feeling like this. This isn't me. I don't like being like this. I need to change. I want to change. I need help. And something like depression, anxiety, these things are really, really beastly things to deal with. We can't tackle it on our own. We need people by our side to do that. And that's where, you know, whether it's friends, families, close confidants, and very importantly, health professionals. For many people, it starts with visiting their family doctor. And that's why those findings from that research study we were talking about was so alarming, because here's the place that many of us look to as the starting point of getting that help and guys weren't asking for. So we need to change the messaging. It's like, If you're not feeling your best, here's what to do. Here's how to start. And so you'll find on our resource, our Heads Up Guys resource, we give guys scripts to how to start that conversation. And it could be something as simple as like, hey, doc, I've been feeling like shit lately and I don't know what's going on. That opens the door to a very, very important conversation. It can be as simple as that. And so what does that help look like? Sometimes medications are helpful if the symptoms are quite severe and a person's just not functioning well. But very importantly, for every person, what we advocate is therapy. Being able to understand ourselves, understand our minds. How did I get here? Why do I keep making these kinds of decisions that compromise my well-being, that compromise my relationships, that don't allow me to function at my best? How do I understand my mind and myself so I can make better, more adaptive decisions for myself to live my best life? That's what therapy does.
And I would imagine too that you have to get loved ones involved too, right? Because as you say, you need people around you, and that support is probably essential.
It is, and that's how we frame, it on our resources. That you need your support team. You need good people by your side to be with you. And it doesn't mean that you are conceding control of your life. It doesn't mean that you're appearing to others saying, hey, I'm broken, fix me. It's not that at all. In fact, you are taking control of your health. You are taking control of your life. And when you're reaching out to others, it's like, I respect what you have to offer, whether it's just, help with doing chores or important information that you may have that I could use for myself. It's just having good people by you so that you don't feel alone through this journey. Because as I mentioned before, it can be a very, very isolating experience. And for guys, loneliness is already a big thing. And so you really don't want to feel alone when you're tackling something like depression.
Yeah. Do you know, I am curious too, and I don't know if you have this information, but if a man was to disclose what he's going through, so let's say he has serious depression, who is the first person he's most likely going to disclose that to? Like meaning family or outside, or a doctor. Like, yeah, I'm curious to know.
For guys who are in a long-term relationship, more often than not, it's their partner who they turn to. If they're not in a relationship, it is often another family member. But also, if guys do have at least one really close friend, they may, reach out to that person as well. But it's really just the fact that there's a person in their life, no matter what characterizes the relationship, as long as there's one person in their life that they can trust. That's the big thing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you why I was asking. And it's because, it's something you said too about, men don't want to disclose, right? So they're at their doctor's office. They don't even want to tell their doctor. And it made me think, well, if they're so ashamed, sometimes maybe the last people they want to know is their family, because they feel they've let their family down. So might they perhaps, unburden themselves with a friend instead of family, because they can't bear to tell their family everything
Sometimes
they're doing
that is
or what
the
they're
case, indeed. And certainly if there's perception that within their family unit, whether it's the immediate or extended family, that they need to be a certain way. And if they can no longer be that way for others, that there is that shame. Sadly, it's not uncommon for families to reach out after a guy has taken his life, and they'll say, we had no idea. We had absolutely no idea. And those sadly are the cases where they felt for one reason or another that they couldn't share their struggles with their family. In fact, couldn't share it with anybody.
Hmm. Well, I even wonder too about, the workplace, because we spend so much time there. And you were involved in a big survey, a
Mhm.
national survey, right, about the mental health status of men in the workplace. And again, like some shocking findings. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is a study. We looked at men's mental health in the workplace, and what we found were some pretty staggering statistics with regard to levels of depression and anxiety, substance use, anger, loneliness. They were really cutting across the board. There's a lot of suffering that's occurring out there. And what I tell workplaces is like, you can't expect people to just shut off life when they come through the doors of their workplace. These are human beings that are experiencing the breadth of all sorts of emotions related to different aspects of their lives. And say somebody's just lost their wife of 50 years and they had a really close relationship. The guy is grieving immensely. He comes back to her. Is he no longer grieving? No. He's still is
Hmm.
really struggling with that loss, grieving tremendously. We have to acknowledge those human experiences. We also have to acknowledge as workplaces that this is where we spend the majority of our waking hours. So we're actually really primed to be able to support people when they're coming to work and struggling. It doesn't mean that we sort of take ownership of looking after people's health. That there's limits to what workplaces can and perhaps should do, but we don't ignore the reality that a lot of our workforce is struggling, men and women included, and that there are different things that workplaces can do. I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's
No, not at all.
really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the stats that was very disturbing was almost, I think it was 50% of the men who were surveyed were above a threshold for major depression.
Yeah. Can you
That's like about
imagine?
half over. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think workplaces like, can they do, I'm sure they can do a better job. So like, what can they do, or what should they be doing?
I think one of the things is being a part of the conversation about normalizing the fact that we all can experience pain. We can all experience different types of mental health challenges. And it's really important to be attuned to our own health, but also know that supports and resources are out there. And workplaces can be a catalyst not only for those conversations, but also signposting people to those helpful resources. Many people work in places where there's an EAP provider, for example.
Hmm.
Use those. It's a good starting point to getting help. If you're in one of those workplaces that don't have those kind of resources, managers, bosses can still be a conduit to pointing people to helpful resources. Even being able to listen to somebody sharing that they're struggling. And as a boss, I could say, you know what, I'm really glad you shared that. And it's like, I'm not really sure how to handle that right now. I don't know, where to point you or what to do, but I just want you to know that you don't have to be alone in this. And I'll try to do my part to help you on your road to recovery. Just hearing those words can be incredibly helpful for a person. And it's
Mm.
like, oh, somebody actually cares. Somebody cares. It's okay to feel like this. Somebody's going to be there for me if I need to. And I was like, that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also wonder, because it's a workplace, um, do people often confuse stress with depression?
I think they can. And that's an important part of sort of improving the public's mental health literacy, if you will, understanding, stress is this kind of generic thing where I feel kind of overwhelmed by certain things. And definitely
Hmm.
there's a connection between stress and anxiety, stress and depression. And it can be an impetus to the evolution of somebody developing depression or anxiety, or it could actually be a consequence. I may be suffering from depression, and I tend to feel, kind of easily overwhelmed because I'm struggling so much. So if somebody's saying, I'm really stressed, that's not something to be ignored, because it could be, say, somebody may be on a slippery slope here, or somebody may already be struggling.
Yeah, because I also think, maybe men just say, oh, what I'm feeling is just stress. When it's not stress, maybe they're actually very depressed.
Yeah, and so we can carry this conversation forward and say, okay, well, I'm just really stressed, and it's like, okay, but experiencing a lot of stress, I'm sure you don't feel very good about that. It's not something that you want present in your life.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do about it? Let's nip this thing in the bud before it grows into something more serious.
Yeah. Do I want to just go back and talk a little bit. We were talking about society and expectations, and there's something as well about the messaging I feel that we get through various media in a public way that seems to set up two camps of women and men against each other. Why can't we have everybody rise? And I think part of that mixed messaging isn't helpful for men either. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes I hear that whether it's implicit or sometimes it can be explicit, that the struggles that women have faced, continue to face, is because of men. And yeah.
And sometimes it is, though.
Well, it is. Yeah.
It is. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
But that can be, compounded, and it can be used too generally, and men start feeling ashamed. And the only way if you continue that line of rationale, the only way to lift women up, so to speak, is to put men down. That's how a lot of guys are coming into my office feeling that way, that sometimes feeling ashamed about being a man.
Do you hear that a lot?
Sadly, I do. Sadly, I do. And I like what you had said a moment ago, is that why can't we lift everyone up? Everyone as a human being has a right to good health and happiness as a member of society, as a human being on this planet. Whether you're a man, woman, doesn't matter your gender, doesn't matter your sex. It just matters that you're a human being, and you deserve dignity, respect, good health, happiness, as I said. And if men have been struggling, as the statistics clearly show, then it's like, what can we do to help men? And it doesn't have to come at the expense of others. And it's just pointing out, people ask, why did you create Heads Up Guys? And it's like, because guys are killing themselves at astonishing rates. So we need to do something different. And it's just acknowledging that we need to be better in certain spaces, lift them up.
Yeah.
And it's like, and so, well, why should men's mental health be important to everyone? Because every man who takes his life was somebody's son, father, husband, brother, friend, colleague. It affects all of us. So it's not about privileging men's mental health. It's about recognizing that a segment of society is suffering a lot, to the point that a lot of them are looking to end that suffering through taking their own lives because they feel that there are no other options. So what can we do to help them?
Yeah. So you say you're hearing that societal comment from a lot of men. And then I think back to that statistic about suicide being the second leading cause for men under 50. Yeah. So what are you hearing from those men, younger men,
Well, a lot of struggles. One of them is loneliness. A lot of guys feel very lonely. In fact, if you were on our Heads Up Guys site, you might have seen our stress test. So through, more than 150,000 men taking a stress test, we found that the most frequently cited stressor in men's lives is loneliness. Men feel lonely.
And what does that loneliness look like for these men?
Well, if you get to the heart of loneliness, feeling that there are no people who care about you, that you don't matter, that you're alone in life. It's like your existence has no relevance to others. And a lot of guys are feeling that way.
Okay. And so what I'm wondering too is, and I don't know if you have this information, but would a lot of those men, are they in relationships? So in fact, they do have family. They may have a partner. They may have friends, but in spite of all that, they still feel lonely.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yep. So just because you may have a partner or you may have a large social network, you can still feel lonely.
Yeah, I guess that's true for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I'm wondering, I wonder if it's a worse problem for men. Do we know?
That I don't know, but what I do know for men is that one of the most difficult things for men to say is, I'm lonely. I feel lonely.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because I think women are, generally speaking, are allowed to say those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And women tend to, divulge their feelings maybe with their female friends or their family. Yeah.
Yep. And so if you say, if you acknowledge that a lot of guys are feeling lonely, and then you compound that with struggling with a mental health challenge like depression, and then feeling like you can't or shouldn't reach out to anybody for help, you just think about how isolating that is. That's really hard.
Yeah. So, because you're working with men directly, you do these surveys, you do research. What is it like when a man actually does get good help? Tell me how that can change his life.
It's profoundly life altering. Being able to be in the presence of, I'm not saying that every man needs a male therapist, but I think when you are in the company presence of another man who shows genuine care and concern and empathy, gives the person the space to feel and be with their pain and be okay with that. Be okay with that. And it's like,
oh, so you're not actually erasing pain or anything. They're living with it.
Yes, to be able to experience all of it. And for a lot of guys, they'll be harboring decades worth of pain, never being able to fully experience it. And so part of that therapeutic process is actually giving space to feel that pain, then to understand, where did that come from? Where did that pain come from? And through that, you understand yourself better. You understand your mind better. And that's something that is incredibly empowering. Very often it feels like, I'm controlled by these thoughts that go through I'm controlled by these strong emotions. But when you understand yourself better and you gain this self-awareness, this insight, you gain control over your mind, if you will, rather than feeling that your mind controls you. So
are you saying, are you breaking a pattern of thought?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give an example? And I hope there are many, many examples of someone who you've helped and what happened to their life afterwards.
I'll give you an example of my program manager, the program manager for HeadsUpGuys. So his name is Josh. I was not Josh's therapist, so I can't talk about me helping him in that therapeutic sense. But Josh was the very first person that I hired for Heads Up Guys. He had a computer science background, exactly what we needed to develop a digital resource, but he also had lived experience. He had suffered tremendously, and he was looking to start life anew, scope out a new path for himself. And we're coming upon our 10-year anniversary next summer, next June. And Josh has been there every step of the way. He's been a critical part of the success that we've enjoyed. And I've seen Josh blossom. He shares his story because he knows his story resonates with millions of men. It's like, I suffered to the point where he didn't want to be here anymore. And he knows that, as painful as that story and that part of his history is, he knows that by sharing that story, he's saving other men from making that same decision. And that really connects with a lot of people. And I've seen him grow into, a really capable and competent and caring person. And, it brings a tear to my eye, when I think about just the evolution of him as a person. And it's because he felt that it was okay to share that he was struggling. He knows that it's okay to say, you know what, today's a really tough day and I need a little time to myself. And that's all right. There's no shame behind that.
Yeah.
There's no judgment. Knowing that there are people who care is also really empowering. So I just share that because, to me, this is the nearest example I can give you, but a very powerful and profound one, where a guy reached out for help. He got that help. He found himself in an environment with other supportive, and I'm not just talking about myself, but with other people who cared and understood, and how that kind of environment can really help a person grow to become their best selves.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think, when it is such a huge problem, and not just in this country, but in many other countries, why is more not being done about this? And why is it not even being talked about more?
Mary, I ask myself this every day. Why? It is changing. I will say that. Okay. If I think about 5 years, even 10, 15 years ago, the conversation is changing. More attention is being given. There is, I believe, more empathy and compassion being provided to others who are struggling. But what we still need to really change is guys, for example, being able to be more empathic and compassionate toward themselves when they are struggling. That's the real stubborn aspect of stigma, if you will, that we still need to work a lot on. But nonetheless, we continue to do that. Look, having a resource like Heads Up Guys out there kind of legitimizes the pain and suffering that a lot of guys feel. And I don't say that in a naive kind of way, but very often for guys, when they see a resource and come across it for the first time, there's an immediate sense of relief. It doesn't mean their problems go away, but it's like, wow, I'm not alone in this. What I'm feeling is such a thing that there's actually this formal professional resource out there to help fellas just like me.
Yeah.
Like, that's...
Yeah. And you know what? Like, I'm thinking about this too, and probably the same feeling of shame and, oh my God, I shouldn't be talking about this. That probably spills over into the larger discussion, because maybe men, they don't want to make a big stink about it. Like, because if they made a big stink about it, then maybe something would be done about it.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I often say that, one of the limitations of us guys, we're not the best at advocating for ourselves. I wish that part could change. And I understand a lot of guys don't want to make a big fuss about men's health issues like depression as an example, but I'm willing to do that. And so, and I do, because it's a
Yeah, and
topic that
why? Why do you? Because you're very passionate about this.
I am, because I just hate seeing people suffer. And I see a lot of guys suffering, and I'm in a position to do something about that. And so I feel it's sort of my personal, moral, professional obligation to do that. And so I'm willing to do it. And, if I can be a small part of the change, it makes me feel good about what I do.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it very much, John. And I very much appreciate your coming on to talk about this as well.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for creating some time and space for this. It means a lot to me.
That is Dr. John Ogrodniczuk. He is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and director of the psychotherapy program at the University of British Columbia. He's also the founder of HeadsUpGuys. Now, if you or a male, someone you know, is finding it difficult to cope, please visit their website. It's headsupguys.org, where you can find help. And please check out our show notes as well, because you'll find out more on John and his work. If you'd like to follow us on social to get the latest CRAM updates, our handle is @CRAM Ideas. Thanks for joining us today, and see you back here next time.